Ever think about those stories families tell? The ones, passed down for generations. Like, what if those stories, the ones you always thought were true, are actually hiding something much darker?
It's interesting, right, how often we kind of create these narratives to deal with, well, difficult truths. Especially in families, sometimes those narratives get passed down like they become the accepted truth, even if they're not, completely accurate.
And that's what we're looking at in this deep dive. The case of Hattie DeBardelaben,
Hmm,
a black grandmother who died back in 1945 in rural Alabama. Officially, a heart attack.
right.
But her family always thought there was more to the story. And now, these newly released FBI documents, they reveal a way more chilling truth.
Yeah, it's striking how these documents, they really expose this pattern of systemic racism and abuse of power. Sadly, it was all too common, especially in the Jim Crow South.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's 1945, racial tensions are high,
Hmm.
and you have these four white law enforcement officers. They arrive at Hattie's farm and accuse her of selling illegal whiskey.
You really have to think about the historical context here. The Jim Crow South,
Hmm.
it was, well, a system specifically designed to disenfranchise and control black people. So the power dynamics between, those officers and Hattie would have been incredibly skewed.
So then there are two very different accounts of what happened that day. You have the police report, which states that Hattie died of a heart attack in the back of their car. But then there's this other version of events, a much darker one. And that comes from Hattie's 15-year-old son, Edward.
And Edward's account, it paints a truly horrific picture. He describes his mother being brutally beaten, her pleas for help totally ignored. It really challenges the official narrative, and it just raises so many questions about what really happened.
Edward's account goes into detail, like how his mother was punched repeatedly, even knocked into boiling water. Can you imagine witnessing that as a teenager? Seeing your own mother suffer like that?
I mean, the trauma inflicted on Edward, being forced to watch his mother in such pain, unable to help, it must have been immense. And the impact of that kind of experience, it can last a lifetime.
It makes you wonder why the officer's story was just accepted, without any real scrutiny, you know? Like, if Hattie had a pre-existing heart condition, as her doctor noted, wouldn't that have been even more reason to, carefully investigate how she died?
Well, that's where, the systemic biases of the time really come into play. Sadly, I don't think a thorough investigation was a priority when it came to a case involving a black woman. Protecting the officers and maintaining a certain social order, that often took precedence over the truth.
And then there's this detail about the undertakers who examined Hattie's body. One of them described her foaming at the mouth and nose. And her head, it was falling back unnaturally when they moved her.
Those details, they're crucial because they point to something way more sinister than just a heart attack. There's actually a medical study highlighted in the documents. It emphasizes that a neck dissection, meaning a very detailed examination of the neck area, would have been necessary to definitively rule out a broken neck. But that wasn't done.
Why do you think that crucial step was overlooked?
It seems like the investigators, well, they already had their conclusion. A thorough examination might have contradicted the narrative they were trying so hard to uphold.
Yeah, it really seems like the truth was intentionally buried to protect those involved. Cases like this, they really highlight how deeply embedded systemic racism can be within institutions and how it can completely silence victims and their families.
And what's tragic is that Hattie's family, they lived for decades without ever knowing what really happened. They only just recently learned the truth after the FBI documents were released. Can you imagine that the shock and the grief they must have felt, having their suspicions finally confirmed after all this time?
It's just a stark reminder that justice delayed is often justice denied. The emotional toll on this family, it's unimaginable to carry the weight of those unanswered questions for years and then to finally have to grapple with the horrifying reality of Hattie's death. The documents, they actually reveal the family's reaction to the truth. And it was this mix of shock and grief, but also a sense of validation. Like they finally understood why their father, Edward, never spoke about what happened that day. I mean, the trauma he must have carried all those years must have been just unbearable.
Yeah, the release of these documents, while certainly painful, it did provide a degree of closure for the family. It finally acknowledged the injustice that occurred, and it gave Hattie a voice.
It's such a powerful testament to the family's perseverance, their refusal to let Hattie's story be forgotten. They kept searching for answers, even when it seemed like the truth was lost forever.
This case really shines a light on the importance of truth and reconciliation, even decades after the fact. It also highlights the need to address the systemic biases within institutions that perpetuate these kinds of injustices.
The fact that it took so long for the truth to even come out raises concerns about how many other stories like Hattie's remain hidden.
Hmm.
How many other families are still out there searching for answers, that their loved ones' memories tarnished by these incomplete narratives.
It's a sobering thought for sure, Hattie's case. It serves as a reminder that we always need to be vigilant to question the official narrative, and to advocate for transparency and accountability, especially when it comes to law enforcement.
It also emphasizes the importance of really listening to and believing victims and their families. Often, they are the ones who hold the key to uncovering the truth, even when powerful forces are trying to suppress it.
Absolutely. Their voices need to be amplified. Their stories need to be heard. We have a responsibility to challenge the systems that perpetuate these injustices and to work towards creating a more equitable and just society for everyone.
Hattie's case, it's a tragic but important reminder of the work that still needs to be done. We can't let stories like hers be forgotten. They have to serve as a catalyst for change. So much uncovered in this deep dive. We talked about the tragic death of Hattie DeBardelaben, the systemic racism that enabled the cover-up, and just, wow, the strength of her family in seeking the truth. But, what does it all mean for us, like today?
It's a good question. Hattie's story, it raises these crucial questions about accountability and justice. How do we ensure that law enforcement is held responsible for their actions, even decades later?
Right.
And how do we prevent similar tragedies from ever happening again?
Right. It's a complex issue, no easy answers. But I think one thing's clear, right? We have to learn from the past. Acknowledging the injustices, understanding how they happened, that's crucial to creating a more just future.
Yeah, and this case also emphasizes how important it is to challenge official narratives.
Hmm.
We can't just take things at face value, especially when power dynamics are at play. We got to question, investigate, demand transparency.
Right. It's about creating a society where everyone feels safe,
Hmm.
protected, regardless of race or social standing. A society where everyone's life is valued, every voice is heard.
Exactly. It's about dismantling those systems that perpetuate these injustices, working towards a future where tragedies like Hattie's never happen again.
Hattie's story, yeah, it's heartbreaking, but it's also a story of resilience. Her family's, their unwavering pursuit of the truth, it's inspiring,
Yeah.
really. Reminds us that even when things are really tough, the fight for justice, it has to continue.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that the past, it's never really the past. The impact of injustice can be felt for generations. But I think by facing these uncomfortable truths, by learning from history, we can create a better future for everyone.
So as you think about Hattie DeBardelaben's story, I want you to consider this. What can we do, as individuals, as a society, to ensure that tragedies like this never happen again? How can we honor Hattie's memory? By working towards a world where justice prevails and everyone is treated with dignity and respect.